Do you think that Trump is coming back to run again? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't think he's decided yet, but I think he will. And
do you think there's going to be a huge schism in the Republican Party when it happens, or do you think enough people? I understand that when Russia is in the process of invading another country, they very much want to center the conversation about Russian-American relationships or about the sovereignty of the United States or the sovereignty of Russia or the way that these two superpowers act, but that is not what the discussion is about today. It's whether or not Russia's invasion into Ukraine can be justified. We can bring up as many defeated talking points as we want. I'm used to people doing it over and over and over again. We can talk about how the suspension of some ABM treaty magically destroys second strike capabilities, even though when Nick was pushed, he admitted that an ABM silo cannot become an ICBM silo. He admitted that Putin was allowed access to these silos by Biden if he wanted to investigate. He admitted that this technology that Putin is so worried about doesn't even exist yet. It might not be here for 10, 20, or 30 years. And he admitted that if this technology was so threatening, who cares? We could install it just as easily in Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, down in Turkey. If we wanted to nuke Russia from anywhere, if we wanted to encircle Russia from anywhere, if we wanted to have ABM silos around the world that could intercept an infinite amount of MIRVs, an infinite amount of ICBMs, we could already do it. We don't need Ukraine to do that. Just like Nick already admitted that even if Ukraine never even had an accession plan to NATO, Russia, in the realist perspective, would just invade them anyway. They have a right to it. Why? Because of strategic interest in the Black Sea that Turkey is constantly threatening anyway. Controlling Sevastopol doesn't get them through Istanbul, doesn't get them into the Mediterranean. There isn't even a good strategic reason around the world why Russia would have access to these ports, how it would help them. And the idea that capturing Ukraine, the idea that Russia invading Ukraine is representing the same threat to their sovereignty as Ukraine democratically choosing to join the NATO alliance, the idea that America is this benign hegemony and they've never done anything and blah, 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 that's absolutely not true. I've never said it. But there is the fact that there is an old Eastern European saying that if you call for America, America will come. If you call for Russia, Russia will come. And if you call for no one, Russia will come. There is something to be said for the fact that these countries, whether we're talking the Baltics, whether we're talking Poland, Romania, any Southeastern Europe, there is the fact that these countries are looking towards NATO and they want to join NATO. Their citizens are voting to join NATO. We can't even accept just one or two at a time. It always have to be in batches of 3, 4, or 5 because we don't want to accept only one because it'll cause conflict in the countries because people are so desperate to get into our military alliance. And the only thing that Russia has done with their continued aggression into Ukraine has proven today more than ever a good reason why that alliance still exists. And that's to ensure the security of your country if you are not willing to pursue a nuclear arms program of your own. So I would prefer a world where NATO expands to include more countries than the world that Nick advocates for, where Russia has justification to invade anybody they want, and the only successful path forward if you are a smaller country is to acquire nuclear weapons of your own.
All right, now there are several questions here. Thank you both gentlemen here for participating. I didn't have to do much. I just kind of let two old fellows go at it, right? And that's how I prefer it, honestly. I feel like too many times the moderator kind of gets too involved here. It's best to just let the two participants go at it. But I saw this last question just popped up actually, and I don't know how many more I'll ask. Since both you've been generous with your time, but do either of you think we are actually in danger of a World War III type situation? I'll start with Nick since Destiny was just talking, but I definitely want to hear what Destiny has to say about that too. But what do you think, Nick?
Yeah, we certainly are, and is it imminent? I mean, who's to say? The problem is that whenever you've got these disputes between great powers and nuclear powers, it's always a risk. And the biggest concern is people don't take it seriously. Honestly, when people say there's no threat of World War III, that's actually when World War III is the most likely, because it's people's assumption, it's people's confidence, like, oh, that'll never happen. That's really what brings it about. So I don't think it's likely. The United States won't impose a no-fly zone. Russia's not going to attack NATO. So, I don't think it's likely. But you don't like to see this kind of conflict. You don't like to see Russia or the United States being invited to impose a no-fly zone over a country that Russia's invading. So certainly we're closer to it now than we were 4 weeks ago.
All right, go ahead, Destiny.
I think that Biden has done a really good job at being responsible about dictating the exact terms to how the United States would participate in this war. It doesn't surprise me that Zelensky, that Ukraine would be crying for a no-fly zone, that they want U.S. troops on the ground. Obviously, I would expect him to ask for it. He should, as the leader of that country. But I mean, it's pretty clear that the United States has been pretty responsible in its terms of engagement. We'll do what we can, from afar, but we're not going to have troops on the ground there. We're not obviously going to be imposing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Hopefully, we're never going to have a situation situation where U.S. troops and Russian troops are crossing swords with each other, or U.S. Planes are shooting at Russian planes or anything like that. And I mean, as long as it continues to be managed like that, and as long as Putin's scope of engagement is limited, as Nick would say, to just Ukraine, ideally that is something that never comes to pass. I don't think that anybody, even Putin, wants like that type of conflict.
What do you think about Zelensky in general?
What an awesome base guy. What an amazing leader. Oh my God. Stays in Kyiv, is with his soldiers, posting on TikTok, dances to save Ukraine. What a great Kyiv. That's right. That great Ukrainian capital. I think he's a great guy. Did a TV show about how he'd be a great president, and now he's fucking president today. You'd think that you, a Trump supporter, would fucking love the guy. But I think Zelensky has done an amazing job. He's doing a really good job. I wish the best for him. And damn, if he survives his conflict, Putin has made the dude a fucking national hero. Which is good. Maybe they can worship somebody that's not a fucking ex-Nazi now for once in Ukraine. And then the people don't have that argument to use against the people there. I want to answer
the question. Zelensky is a Western puppet and a dog. He's a puppet of the Eastern Ukrainian mafia. And, he's caused this whole thing. This is an unwinnable war, okay? Russia's going to steamroll Ukraine. He's just getting people killed. Very serious. He conscripts the entire adult male population. You can't leave. He's dooming them to die for a cause that is lost. So I think Zelensky sucks, and I think if you like him, you're gay. And I hate the whole situation. I support Russia. I hope he gets put in jail forever or worse. I hope that Russia puts him in jail forever or worse, because that's what he deserves.
I see a chat here. Destiny, let's talk about Western aggression. Russian forces found 30 biolabs on their border in Ukraine with weaponized diseases. The NWO was preparing, not Hollywood Hogan, by the way, or Scott Hall, but the other NWO. The NWO was preparing to exterminate Russia with Russians, I guess, with a bioweapon. And he ends it with an insult.
I mean, this is all bullshit. And I think Nick knows it, and that's why he was smart enough not to bring any of this up. I mean, the United States the United States funds research labs all over the world. I mean, especially in the wake of the coronavirus, we have research labs all over the place that are doing research on deadly pathogens. I mean, it's part of what we want happening around the world. You don't want countries managing this stuff with no foreign oversight. We want to be able to share our intelligence. We want to be able to share our biological understanding with these labs to make sure they're conducting research in safe and effective ways. The idea that there exists some top secret bioweapons labs in Ukraine to target fucking Russian DNA, that's even possible. I know the Russian State Department has tweeted out some wild shit, but I'll hold my breath until some actual evidence of these insane fucking fox-die bioweapons come out of any Ukrainian labs. And I think it's a little bit sad if you're a person, you do think it's good that all biological research around the world should be contained with its own country without sharing any intelligence, any resource, or anything with anybody else. It's just not how bio research works today in the world.
I just think that's so funny. I mean, I hope that people see the kind of Western hubris on display. It's there's this concession that these biolabs studying deadly pathogens are there in Ukraine, but once again, it's sort of hand waved away. We do research all over the world. This is just what we do, folks. It's unconscionable to imagine Russia or China.
We have these labs in China.
The shoe on the other foot stuff. It's if China, hang on, I didn't interrupt you. If China had a biolab in Canada studying deadly pathogens, would we be
China funds grants and has students that go back and forth between U.S. biolabs and Canadian ones as well. Of course. What do you mean?
Why do you have to interrupt me? Is it because
you're just lying? Go ahead.
Because your argument is so weak that even just by me talking obviously disputes it. It's just this total, you're just so naive to say the West doesn't have designs on other countries. It's totally innocuous. That's no big deal. That's just Russian propaganda. It's it's intolerable that would be occurring in Ukraine, right on Russia's border, our number one chief adversary. It just makes no sense. I mean, no state would tolerate this.
Do you think do you think that China doesn't fund or send students or intelligence to any other labs in Canada or the United States?
We're not talking about the same thing here.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, what Chinese biolabs studying deadly pathogens are you talking about?
We don't know any of them because we don't talk about them. China funds labs all over the world, just like we fund labs all over the world. We do. We'll look at the Wuhan Institute.
You're fabricating that out of thin air.
Well, people can go and
Wuhan?
People can go.
Wuhan Institute in Wuhan, in China?
That we have had grants and funding go towards. Yeah, of course. We do this all over the world.
China knows about, and it's in their territory. It's not a secret facility on their border.
Wait, none of these were secret in Ukraine. These are well known about. What are you talking about?
Oh, please. As far as
some of these labs have pathogens that have existed since the Soviet era. Yeah, what do you mean?
Yeah, and we lied about their intention and said, "Oh, we were decommissioning them." Oh, really? We were decommissioning.
We didn't
them
know.
for
We
like
recommended
14
they
years?
be decommissioned, but apparently Ukraine didn't follow through. But we had to
You're just
respect their
fabricating
sovereignty.
stuff. Well, China does in the U.S. No,
Oh, you can go.
They
Hey,
don't
you
do it in
Google it if you
Canada.
want. Chinese funding biolabs overseas. People can go look it up if they want. Yeah.
Right.
All right, now let's see here. I have a final question too, but I see a couple super chats came in. Let's see. How does Destiny reconcile his undying love of sovereignty with other? No, I'm not gonna read that one. I just now saw the end of it.
Cuck joke coming on there.
It took a turn there that I did not see.
What was it?
Sure, it has something to do with the sovereignty of my fucking wife's pussy or some shit. Is that?
Literally what happened. Like,
Yeah, there you go. I don't know how I saw that one coming. I just have a way to see at the end. I used the realist perspective, and I knew what influence he was trying to
There's
exert
some
there.
aggression on your wife.
Yeah, that got out of hand. Is Russia Voldemort or Dumbledore? That's another one that came in. Sorry, forgot my name in the question for Destiny. What was the question that you had? When will Russia get Netflix back? Russia are missing their LGBTQ content. Is that the one? Is that the question that you had, or was it the Voldemort or Dumbledore? I don't know if you want to answer that. I had a final question though, and I'll start with you, Destiny. Where do you see this thing headed? Like, where's this gonna? I mean, there will be some kind of resolution eventually there in Ukraine. So
I mean, initially, all the military analysts said that the prediction was that this war would be over pretty soon. I think people were saying like within 2 weeks, Kyiv would probably fall to Russia. But apparently I don't know, I'm seeing like a ton of different reasons why Russia's military aggression has failed so far up to this point, whether it's due to lack of maintenance, lack of training, lack of planning, more resistance in Ukraine than they thought. I've heard that NATO intelligence sharing in Ukraine is assisting them more than they thought. Weapons from Turkey maybe is assisting them more than was previously thought. But I don't know at this point. I still imagine Ukraine probably falls soon, but I think that the more protracted the conflict gets, the worse it probably looks for Russia, both at home domestically and probably internationally. But who knows? We'll see.
Mr. Fuentes, what do you think? Where's it going to go?
I think it's already over. I think Ukraine has been flattened. They're decimated. Russia will win the war. And I think the outcome, I don't think that Russia will try to annex Ukraine. I don't think that Russia will even try to occupy all of Ukraine. I think that Russia will simply ensure that Ukraine does not join NATO. I think they'll probably install a pro-Russian government. Maybe they'll annex, Novorossiya. They'll annex its area of Russia. They'll annex the whole Black Sea coast and connect with Transnistria, and maybe the Donbass, everything east of the Dnieper River. I think that's probably as much as they do, and even that I think would be that would probably be more. But I was surprised by the invasion, to be honest. So maybe they'll go that far, but. Yeah, so I think that's where it's headed. I think that Russia will remain ostracized from the international community. I don't think that's a good thing. I think that it's in America's strategic interest to pursue a détente with Russia and then ultimately work with Russia on things. Instead, we've kicked them out of the system, kicked them out of the dollar system. This will have consequences for decades. It's not, the U.S. dollar is not going to be replaced overnight, but it will have a ripple effect throughout time as China rises as a peer competitor to America. So, all in all, even if you're pro-America, this is bad for America. The whole situation's a big blunder for America, and it's our fault.
Destiny, tell people where to find you, sir.
Twitch.tv/Destiny, YouTube.com/Destiny.
Mr. Fuentes, tell people where to find you as well.
Cozy.tv/Nick. Well, hey, wait, before we go, just want to say, thanks, Ethan, for hosting the debate. Thanks, Destiny. Destiny, you're all right. Compared to Hassan and Vosh and these other guys.
We're setting the bar pretty low there, but. Okay.
Yeah, no, but you're real. I watch these other debates, and I'm like, this Destiny guy doesn't seem too bad compared to these guys. So I give you my official endorsement, official Nick Fuentes, thumbs up, white nationalist, sarcasm, seal of approval, endorsed by a far right guy.
Thanks. Wow.
We like that you're coming around. We pursue a détente. One day you and I will be fighting side by side. You'll come around one of these days, Destiny. You'll
okay. I want to ask.
You're already halfway there.
Gotcha. Can I ask you a real question? I'm actually super curious. Okay. I think I might know the answer, but I'm curious. Okay. So if you, and I am going to admit, I don't follow as much of all the politics. I watch some of your conference thing or whatever, right? But if you're like an America first guy, that's a big thing for you. Let's say that all the arguments you were making about like American hegemony and everything is like true, that NATO is expanding American power and influence over the world, et cetera, et cetera. Why wouldn't you be advocating for that in kind of like a neoconservative kind of way, that NATO should be expanding and bombing countries and exerting U.S. influence everywhere? Why would you advocate more on the Russian side of this conflict?
Well, so there's two ways. It works in two ways. Number one, even if I was the State Department, I would still say it was bad, because you can get too greedy. And this is what Russia says about, you should watch the Oliver Stone, I don't know if you've seen this, but the Putin interviews, you might think it's propaganda, but it's actually interesting. And he says, what the problem is that America emerges from the Cold War thinking they could do anything. They defeat the Soviet Union, they emerge as the undisputed power, and they say, we can do anything that we want. We have unlimited power, and we can do whatever we want. And he says, then we're no longer forced to be strategic. It's you understand, this is moral hazard. We think we could do anything, and then we're given to making mistakes, and we're given to hubris and greed. And so I think the balance is in our interest as well. I think that, because look at what we've done. I'm not the first person to say this, but we've pushed Russia into the arms of China. China is our peer competitor in this century. What we should be doing is forming as many alliances. If I'm the neocon, I want to form as many alliances against China as possible. Russia and China are natural adversaries, not allies, because they're in competition in Central Asia. And they're border each other in Eurasia. So and Russia's a second-rate power. It's called triple diplomacy, like Nixon did. Nixon played China, then a second-rate power against Russia, the USSR, the peer competitor. We should do the same in this century with Russia as a second-rate power.
So here's a question, okay? So my understanding is there were kind of talks with Yeltsin, but there were definitely talks with Putin, and especially during the War on Terror, the United States started to take a bit of a more cooperative relationship with Russia. And I didn't study as much for this part, but I feel like at one point, I think there was an open offer for Russia to consider joining NATO. But I think Putin didn't like the idea of it because he wasn't going to apply and go through the normal channels. He thought that Russia should be given special treatment. So it seems like, and I understand there's a stark difference between Cold War era U.S. foreign policy and post-Cold War era, where, not to say that it's perfect, obviously situations like Iraq and arguably Afghanistan pop up, but it's been largely, I think, a bit more responsible than prior to that. It seemed like there was space for Russia to consider some sort of ascension into like this Western hegemonic sphere. Like, do you not think that was possible, or do you think that they shouldn't consider it, or that's just completely impossible now, or what?
I think it was impossible because I think America, well, and this is what Putin says, you have to go to the source, because we can assume his intentions, and of course what he says is rhetoric, but we can parse out what his analysis based on what he says.
Sure.
And what he says is that the United States doesn't want partners, it wants vassals. It does not want Russia to have sovereignty in the true sense and independence in the true sense and have its own independent policy. It wants Russia to be like Germany, France, or the UK in the sense that they just sort of follow what the US says. That's what Russia says. Now, Putin also says that he said to Bill Clinton in 2000, he said, maybe Russia could be a part of NATO. And Bill Clinton said, oh, yeah, maybe. But what Putin also alleges is that in the Chechen War, the United States was talking to Chechen separatists and even Chechen terrorists. That's the Putin claim. And Putin says that he brought that up with George Bush, and George Bush said, oh, I'll kick their ass when I find out who did that. And it went on. And then also, you do have the ABM thing, you do have the other things. And by the way, like Putin was cooperative with the West. Like Putin allowed the West to use Tajikistan as a base to send troops into Afghanistan in 2001. Russia was the first country to call George Bush after 9/11. So there was this cooperation, but I think that soured. And your side would say, well, that's because Putin's like this evil dictator.
That's not my argument. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, that's the NATO rhetoric. But the Putin side says, well, America wanted to subordinate Russia, and Russia didn't want that. And when Russia didn't want that and chafed at that, America didn't really care. And America just, it's unfortunate that it's out, because I think that would have been the ideal arrangement. But I think that America wants to control everything. They're too greedy. They're too prideful. They want to control everything. And this actually backfires on America, ultimately, even if you're the State Department.
Do you not think there might be an argument that Russia doesn't want to join NATO? Because I don't buy the arguments of like you're somehow forfeiting your sovereignty to NATO, when I mean, like, you've had countries within NATO that abstain from joining like NATO-led invasions because of disagreements. You've got France, who's famously and historically been like pretty NATO skeptic, where they've even like driven down their support, I think it was like 2010, they finally like fully recommitted to NATO operations. So I mean, I don't feel like Russia's sovereignty would be threatened as much. It feels more like they want to be like that multipolar world. They want to be the other world order. Not like, I don't mean that in like a dictatorial, evil, bad guy sense, but just that it feels like Russia is one of the only countries in the world that can rival the United States in terms of like recent military history, nationalism, like that sense of pride and honor, and, you know, being the enemy and Rocky and all of it, and having like the big country. It feels like it's that kind of sense, that there is like some like unique cultural aspect of Russia that doesn't need to just be partnered with the rest of the world, but deserves its place on a pedestal next to the US, is what it feels like.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is what Putin wants. Putin wants Russia to be a world power again, but I guess where I disagree is I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's what it means. I mean, Russia is a great power. Putin wants Russia to be a great power, and what that entails is a great power has its own agenda, it has its own interests, it has its own engagements. And a great power can cooperate with another great power, but it's not going to be subordinated to the American-led world. And this is like how the continent of Europe was throughout the 19th century. It was settled through diplomacy. It was settled through negotiations. There was ironically a Crimean War was the only major continental war in that time. But you know that's what I think, and that's I think where the world is going. Like it or not, it's a multipolar world order. And you know, Putin has the leverage, and the country's paid the price to exert its independence. But that's what they want, and the United States is unwilling to accept competitors. And the thing is, I don't think it's up to us. I think that Russia is a competitor. Putin wants to be a competitor, and so they are. And this is a practical reality that, like it or not, we have to deal with. Instead, we want to pretend that reality isn't real, or try to contain that, and we can't contain Russia. It's just as evidence in Ukraine, we cannot contain them without a tremendous cost to both of us. So
do you think that if we perceive, and I'll if this, because I understand maybe you won't agree on some of these descriptive grounds, but if we perceive Russia to be authoritarian, dictatorial, a little war crimey, you know, will level cities if they don't agree, even within their own border, et cetera, et cetera. If we agree to that, do you think that it's possible that the United States might perceive itself as having some moral right to be like the leader of the world, that the United States might perceive itself as saying like our ruling is more righteous than what Russia's ruling would be, that the alternative that we provide and the fact that other countries seek to join, and I'm not trying to get you, I'm asking you to say if those things are true, because I'm sure you might understand, or you might say the United States committed some of those crimes. But do you think there's any world where the United States has that perception that they do have that kind of like right to push itself in to the Western world more than Russia does?
No, and I think that's what sovereignty means. You know, sovereignty means that you get to govern your country how you want, and the sovereign gets to decide. And in Russia, the sovereign is Putin. And so and you talk about the worst things like the war crimes and so on. Well, that's just it. Sovereignty means you get to make those determinations. Like, you know, the United States tortures people in Guantanamo. The United States does torture. Does Russia say, you know, I think it's against decorum for a nation to even discuss the domestic affairs of another nation. It's very, I mean, that is just not appropriate in international affairs. It's not respectful of sovereignty. But the United States, and that's why people resent the United States, because the United States goes finger wagging in every country's business. Oh, the Uyghurs. Oh, you know, what you did in Chechnya. Oh, what you did here. And America is going to be the arbiter. And it's like, okay, but that's just really not appropriate, because Russia has a very different history than the United States. And, you know, the Chechnya thing was a brutal war. Look at what the Chechen terrorists did. You know, the theater hostage situation and some of the bombings they conducted. That was a brutal conflict. War is brutal. And Russia, as a sovereign, should be able to conduct that in the way that they see fit. And for the United States to throw their dick around and say, well, we get to say what's right and what's wrong. But if people do that to America, well, that's whataboutism and whatever. So I think that, you know, realism is what keeps the world safe. I think that diplomacy is what keeps the world safe. And respecting sovereignty begins and ends with those tricky issues like torture, like so-called war crimes or whatever. And we're obviously not talking about war crimes like, you know, like exterminating a population, like gassing people, like using banned chemical weapons, like rules of war. But like what they did in Chechnya, you know, it's very easy for Americans to come in and judge, but it's like Russia's got the biggest Muslim population in Europe. They have a lot of terrorists and radicals there. There were a lot of problems there. Like, it's easy to judge, but it's an insurgency. That's how these things are fought. And so anyways, that's my answer.
Okay, gotcha. Just curious. Final question that's 90 degrees off of all of this in a completely different direction. And you don't have to answer this if this is vital to your business. I'm just so curious. So obviously you do some of these conferences and you're able to get some pretty mainstream Republicans that will invariably disavow you afterwards. It almost feels sometimes like I'm watching Borat, where people get drafted into the Fuentes convention and then afterwards they're like, oh, I don't know who the fuck that is. I didn't do, like, how do you feel about that? Do you view these people as allies and then backstabbers, or do you feel that you kind of got one over them? You've like tricked them by bringing them onto your thing, and then now you've gotten their implicit endorsement, whether they want it or not. Like, what is your, I guess, how do you view them orbiting around you and your relationship with them? What does that feel like?
That's a tricky question. Well, I know you had a similar situation with your candidate for mayor. And you understand this. It's a difficult situation because politicians have different pressures, and so I and here's the thing. Like, when I bring people to my conference, they're speaking to my audience. It's the America First Political Action Conference is meant to be a substitute for CPAC. We're trying to take over the conservative movement, and I'm a very controversial guy. So I don't take it as a backstab when these people go out and say, oh, I don't support what he said. I don't know who he is. It doesn't matter. I'm the master of ceremonies. I'm the sort of circus leader. I bring the acts. I bring the dancing bear. I bring the whatever. Not to be degrading towards these people, but you know what I'm saying. It's like I'm the host, and so in the same way, like Matt Schlapp. Matt Schlapp is a liberal. Matt and Mercedes Schlapp, they run CPAC. These people are liberals. Nobody holds it against the conservatives that go to CPAC that they go to a conference hosted by Matt Schlapp. I'm more controversial, but we're trying to build a big tent, America First Alliance. It creates problems when these people come to my conference politically because of like Kevin McCarthy and others. But I don't take it as a backstab because we're trying to build a big tent thing. We understand what we're up against. It's difficult to move the needle on these issues, but ultimately, I think what will win out is that the base is closer to us than they are to CPAC. Say whatever you will about us. The worst things you could say about us are not as bad as the worst things you could say about CPAC. And maybe, I know liberals have a hard time with this, but it's like, me being called the white nationalist, like conservatives don't care about that, because when we hear that, we just hear like, oh, you're the boogeyman. But when liberals at CPAC support abortion, we view that as like, that's something that's against our moral values. That's like a huge red line for us. And so ultimately that will win out. It's like, okay, do we go to CPAC where they support abortion and they support, all this horrible stuff that we're against, or do we support AFPAC where, liberals are going to complain, but that's not, that's where we are,
Yeah,
so that
because liberals will complain about conservatives no matter what, right?
Right.
Do you, so I'm curious, and this might be a hard one. Do you ever consider that for the success of the America First movement, would you ever consider like stepping away from that to let a less controversial figure kind of like move it forward? Or what if it came, not saying that this is happening, but what if it came to a point to where America First was on the cusp of maybe breaking a little bit more in, but it seemed like you were hitting this, I'll say glass ceiling a few times where past things that you said have kind of like kept that from moving forward? Do you ever take a step back from everything and work behind the scenes like a shady person, or what? Or is that just maybe, who knows, you'll just see when it happens?
Maybe, but a big part of what we're doing is like, I sort of have to be a part of it only because, there's this concept of the revolution. Like, we're trying to revolutionize the party. And to an extent, if I'm not a part of it, it's almost like we're giving ground to the establishment. And it's like, if they could kick me out and say, oh, we don't want his baggage, it's like the establishment is conquering the revolution. And we want the revolution to conquer the establishment. So I always make, and this is an old Stalin argument, but Stalin used to say, who is conquering who? Is the revolution conquering, or is the revolution being conquered? And I say, insofar as I'm the face of it, we're not canceled, we're not controlled, we're not bought, we're not conceding. So I think it's actually important that someone like me is leading it, because if they're not, it's the same thing that happened to the Tea Party. Let's sweep aside the controversial, even like Trumpism without Trump. They say we want Trumpism without Trump. It's like, well, we need Trump because Trump is the essence of Trumpism. If we have Trumpism led by DeSantis, that's not Trumpism.
You've watered it down to something that becomes indistinguishable of what you've almost like the prior movement has assimilated the revolution and become,
The revolution's been conquered, yes. What about you, Destiny? Do you have any political ambitions?
Really, the next 2 weeks want to get to Diamond 4 in League of Legends. That's what I'm driving for. We'll see what happens.
Do you play Valorant?
Nope, not unfortunately. Don't worry. We'll figure something out. Final question, just randomly because I don't talk to you often. Do you think that Trump is coming back to run again? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't think he's decided yet, but I think he will. And
do you think there's going to be a huge schism in the Republican Party when it happens, or do you think enough people? Because I feel like I would be worried as a Republican. Like, let's say most people like him, but is that enough? Like, if it ends up being like an 80% of the Republicans, like, do you just lose such a huge base that was against him for whatever they feel about January 6th or coronavirus or whatever? Does that represent more of a threat to the Republican Party, or is it necessary? Is it without Trump, there isn't somebody strong enough to oppose what are, like, right now in a pretty unpopular administration by the Democrats, to be fair? Like, do they win without Trump? Is Trump coming back for sure? Yeah, I'm just curious what you think about it.
I think they have a really strong chance no matter what, because you're right. There's no presumptive front runner. Biden, I don't think will run. Kamala's not popular enough. And then who's left? Buttigieg, Warren, Newsom. They just don't have a lot of good options. But yeah, I think Trump, if he ran, I think it would just be over. And on the primary side, I think Trump would easily sail to get the nomination, like he did in 2016. And I think it would be a good thing because it would create a foil, because it's like if he has to run against the establishment, he'll have to differentiate. And I think that'll push him further to the right, because he ran as an independent at 16. He ran as a Republican in 20, and running in 24 against DeSantis or Pence would push him toward that like middle thing again, where he's, because if you look back at 16, he's very different. And, you can understand the appeal. In 2020 becomes like a Sean Hannity, which sucks. So
you think if he ran against establishment candidates, you think he would move further to the center or further to the right? It seems hard because it felt like Trump was more of like a character and like a cult of personality rather than like a consistent set of I'm sure even you would admit this. Trump is not like a man of conservative principles and values, right? But he definitely had like a character to resist the establishment that was relatively unique in him, that wasn't like maybe the beacon of values like somebody might say like Pence or somebody is, whatever, right? So do you think he moves further to the right or more moderate if he has to run against like a bunch of like Ted Cruz, Mike Pence-esque DeSantis figures or whatever?
Well, it depends on how you view the spectrum, because Pence and Cruz are more so-called like traditional conservatives than Trump is. Mm-hmm. But I view Trump where he is more right-wing, because I view Pence and Cruz as like they concede a lot of ground to liberals, and like this free market stuff and limited government. I view that as actually middle, as opposed to Trump, who is more like big government. I don't think big government is left-wing. Like Trump said, we're going to take care of everybody, with healthcare. Like that's not the free market position on healthcare. So I agree. Trump isn't but that's a good thing. He's not a mainstream, conventional conservative. He's a different flavor, and he is a character. And, he understands that we're in a war here. He's like, I just want to win. And conservatives are like, yeah, we want to be on the winning team. We want to run shit. We want our side to win. So I think that he'll be forced to think more like that, as opposed to, because DC changed him and DC made him into another Republican. And I hate that.
Okay.
Real. It's true. Take it from me. I would know. I mean, I regret this. The dissolution of the Trump administration was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 21st century.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's all I got. Okay, cool. Well,
we're best friends now. But you and I'm so glad we're best friends now, and I welcome you as a griper. You should come to when are you going to stream on Cozy? Everyone's wondering, when are you going to get your Cozy channel?
Yeah, as soon as I get banned on Twitch, I guess. We'll see how much further left the kind of corporate media and everything goes. Who knows? I'm in favor of like owning guns or whatever. Maybe that'll be the thing that gets me banned. Who knows these days?
And you hate trannies. So
I love trans people. I absolutely love trans. I have nothing but love for my LGBTQ people.
I support your war against transsexuals.
Absolutely not. What amazing people. I'm glad you reminded. There's some good trans porn I need to go jerk off to right now, actually. So thank you for reminding me of that. I really appreciate it. Some chicks with dicks, some good Fuda shit. Oh my God, I need some femboys in my fucking porn feed. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the reminder.
You poison pilled it.
All right. Have fun. Thanks a lot. Ethan, you are a juggernaut of content. I don't know how you do it with seemingly your life falling apart around you. You still manage to do these streams, so congratulations.
07. Ethan's a tank, dude.
Gentlemen, have a good one. Be safe this weekend.
Yeah. All right, thanks. Bye. Good night.
Recommend the Taft Girl to Nick? Yeah. Oh man, dude, this is the most I think I've read on any particular topic in my life. But I think it paid off. I feel really comfortable for whatever the next debate is, because I don't even think I got halfway through a lot of the stuff I read for or did on even this debate. So I feel really confident in this topic, though. I think that the opposition arguments start to get more and more ridiculous. Whenever I start to hear people repeat like the same thing, like 1.2 trillion or 10-to-1 spending or blah blah blah, then I feel like, okay, I think you kind of understand. Who is the 2v2 with? Is it Adam something, I think? How disappointed are you on a scale from 1 to 10? I thought it was an okay debate. Got a little bit off the rails in the end, but... Your opening statement was too damn long. I'm going to start abusing the fuck out of opening statements because I get very irritated. When other people use opening statements against me, I feel like I've lost the ability to set the pace in a discussion. It feels like they have... It feels like they've gotten to lay out their entire argument. So I think from now on, what I'm going to do is, and I think opening statements are really good because they kind of let me like amass everything into one coherent like storyline so I can explain everything that I feel. And then I have the opening statement and then I can use that as a framework for my discussions. Because generally what I want in like a debate, I'll have like the opponent gives an opening statement and then I'll just fight with the opening statement. But I don't like that... when I let people do that, I let them create the framework for the discussion, and then I kind of have to fight on all of their territory while they've already established the general narrative. So I think I'd rather just like I'll belt out like a 5 to 10 minute opening statement and establish my framework and then work through that.